Hey there, welcome back to the Path to Zion podcast, where we are rediscovering the ancient way. Thank you so much for tuning back in for our Exploring John chapter 5 series as we look through verses 1 through 17. We talked a little bit at the very beginning in part 1 about laying the groundwork of this mysterious place called the Pool of Bethsaida. And what was the source of it? And we asked some tough questions for some about what do we do with verses like the end of verse 3 and all of verse 4 that were added to the original manuscript and didn't exist in the original account? What do we do with what those verses say, which is specifically an angel of the Lord went down and stirred the waters? What do we do if we take that out and set it over here? And how does that affect what's going on and why these people were there, these sick people and lame people? And why was Messiah there? Why was Yeshua there? We weren't told that he endorsed this area whatsoever. To be fair, he didn't say he was in opposition of it either, but we do know this, as we concluded part 1, was saying Yeshua's response after the man was healed was pick up your bed and get out of here. So I'm just saying there are at least maybe hints we could say within the text that at least makes plausible what I proposed from historical records, that maybe this was a manufactured event there, a pagan area, if you will, to lure people in that were needy and sick and hurting for probably financial gain, if you want to get into that part of it. You can look into it yourself, as I encouraged you at the end of part 1. As we look now at part 2, we're going to ask this question that is answered according to the Word, not my opinion nor yours. Why did the non-believing Pharisees miss Messiah? Why did they miss him? Why did they not get the message that Messiah was saying? Now, there are, of course, a lot of small reasons we could just pull and apply according to the Word only. Well, they didn't do this, they didn't do this, they did do this. Well, yes, there are details, if you will, but we're going to just allow the Word of Yahweh to show us the overreaching reason why they missed the Messiah and what Messiah was saying, doing, delivering in his short time here on the earth. So with much of the matters of the waters in their proper place that we did as a consideration, just very small measure in part 1, let's move on to the rest of this account specifically. Improperly handling this text has set many people onto a path of confusion and dispensational chaos, really, okay, compared to what the foundational truth of what I'm just going to propose Messiah was doing and why. I've personally had this exact text here used to challenge something very specific. I'll use as an example of my family traveling on a Sabbath. Back when we used to attend a more formal gathering on Sabbath, we would have to drive over an hour to get there. And when we were new into this, I don't know, 6 years ago, I guess. I don't know. It's irrelevant, really. We're ignorant, and we're still ignorant, just hopefully lesser. But we would drive to go to a gathering. And I had this text, whether they knew it or not, was somewhat used against me in the form of a critique, a correction, that at the time I didn't really understand or have a great answer for, that I have now, thankfully, and hopefully maturity and time and experience and understanding towards these matters that we're talking about in John chapter 5, about Sabbath and what Yeshua was saying versus what the Pharisees who missed Messiah were saying. And so the phrase, paraphrase, we'll say, was Jesus showed us that he was above the Torah because he told the healed crippled man to rise up and walk a great distance carrying his bed. And we know that the Torah spoke against such a thing, just like the non-believing teachers of the law said. Thereby, we clearly know that the Torah was done away with in Jesus. Why do I say that? This is just a good real-life example of one of the many things that we've heard over the years in our endeavor to return to this ancient way and find out what Messiah was teaching beyond just the surface level Christianese, mindset, new religion ideas. Yeshua didn't come and show anybody that he was above his Father's law. He made that clear in so many ways. We will get to some of them. But by using this example to say, see, Messiah told this crippled man to break the Sabbath, and we're going to get to that in a part specifically. If we have that mindset, we miss what Messiah was doing and why, and what he was really saying by doing this action of healing this man on the Sabbath day, and specifically to our point right here, not get ahead of ourselves, the command to take up your bed, your pallet, and walk out of here, your mat, get out of here. If we think for a moment that this is an example of Messiah showing he's above his Father's Sabbath laws, number one, we're just ignorant. Let's just say it fair and square. It's just true for all of us in different increments. We're uneducated towards what Messiah was saying and what the Torah even says, what Sabbath laws even are. If we believe that, our foundation is off, and it will just send us off. It seems small now. It does. It seems small, but it's just a huge chunk, a huge piece of a faulty foundation. If we build on that understanding that, see, this is an example of Messiah standing up and saying, you are missing why I'm here, non-believing Pharisaical Sabbath keepers. If that is a part and piece of our foundation, we will really be building a skewed building that will not last. It won't remain. It will be very faulty. So we have to be careful that we don't build doctrines upon misunderstandings and misappropriations of Yeshua's teachings. So to my point, at that time when this was brought to me, like how we were traveling too far, and don't you know Sabbath law says you can't go certain distances on the Sabbath, just like this man. See, Jesus told this man to take up in his bed and walk, and the Torah keepers said, no, that's unlawful. So Jesus told this man, paraphrase, to break the Sabbath. Aren't you breaking the Sabbath by traveling? And so, well, again, we're going to tackle that here in measure, because that's bad doctrine. We're just ignorant people. We just are. I wish more people would readily admit that. We don't know what we're saying. We're talking out of Christian tradition and not have a proper foundation of the Scriptures, even the New Testament Scriptures. So anyway, I walked away at that time knowing I simply needed to continue learning what the Torah does in fact say, and what the Talmudic teachings of the non-believing teachers of Yeshua's day were, and that they were not one and the same. And I continue that journey today. That is a lifelong endeavor. So in verse 6 specifically, as we see Yeshua seeing this man lying there and asks him if he wants to get well, he says again, arise, lift up your bed and walk. And of course, most of us are familiar with this account, which is why it feels good to highlight, because this is something we think we know, we think we understand in our Christian upbringing. But the main issue that arises is Yeshua's command to carry his bed. As verse 9 comes into view, things get a little bit dicey here. Why? Well, he takes up his bed and he walks, and it was the Sabbath on that day. Okay, well, why in the world does this matter? Yeshua knew what's going on. He wasn't like, oh yeah, is today Sabbath? Come on now. He knew it was Sabbath. And the man even goes, anyway, he runs off after he's made well. Where does he go, friends? In verse 11, he goes to the temple. Why? Well, it's Sabbath. He's going to the temple. Anyway, moving on. But this is where this common theme is at play if we rightly understand the history of the debacle between Messiah and the non-believing Pharisees, okay, of his day. I say that this gets more interesting because verse 9 specifically informs us that that day was Shabbat. It was a Sabbath day, okay? For the majority of my Christian life, I had, of course, read this account many times, okay? Most of you who know me personally or know this program, I have loved the Word for many years after I went through a long, long life of rebellion and stiff-necked, hard-hearted awfulness. And we went through different journeys of working at churches and doing Bible studies and doing different things. But I never had this foundation right until much more recently, where the Word had to agree for the first time in my life, instead of just like, oh yeah, I know what that means. But like now I read something like this and say, well, why is, and it was a Sabbath, so prevalent in this text? And what is going on underneath the surface here? I had, as many people do even today, maybe perhaps you, I had just assumed that this was just one of the many times where Messiah was, quote, overturning the old Torah law, that these stubborn and stiff-necked leaders, the ones that couldn't receive him, were unwilling to leave behind. And he was just making a show of them. I'm going to show them, take that, Sabbath keepers. Well, it's this that I want to highlight for a few moments here, in order to hopefully help all of us continue to, or those of us maybe for the first time, see the greater issue here that was going on within this biblical record in John chapter 5. If we miss this, I would suggest that we miss the entire purpose of why Yeshua healed this man in this manner on a Sabbath day. How this unfolded was no accident, as we've already alluded to. I'm thoroughly convinced he had a specific purpose in doing this here and on this day. So what are some? It would seem to me that very little time passes here as we read this text just verse by verse, insinuating that the leaders were possibly watching this entire thing unfold. Okay? As we go through the middle of our meat of our text, 1 through 17 here in John chapter 5, we see that it's instantaneous that the non-believing Pharisaical leaders, teachers, were like on top of what's going on. I think it's just very plausible to say that they were probably there overseeing this action, even though they were saying, what man did this to heal you? Who did this? As if they didn't know. Maybe they were wanting to know if this healed man knew who this mysterious Messiah was. I would suggest that we have to know the specific purposes of what was going on and why. We're not told that this healed man had time to walk for even 5 minutes, and the leaders show up on the scene, displaying their own traditional laws as superior. And this is the key and the crux of what will shift us into some very important thoughts for some of us that we have to have, make sure we have established rightly. They were saying, we're here, we're watching this. It's not that we hate this man who says he's Messiah. It's not that we just hate him bringing in a new way to live and we want to cling to the old Torah ways. That is not at all what's happening. We're going to begin to insert that greatly because that's the pinnacle of this entire discussion and study. But they wanted to make sure everybody knew that their law, their traditions were superior to everything else, including Yahweh's Torah and Messiah's teachings, Messiah's actions, commands, words. They were superior. That's why they were on the scene so quickly. The words used here in this text are familiar ones. They said that this act of walking was what? Unlawful. Unlawful, okay? Your version may say what mine says in the NASB. It is not permissible for you to carry your pallet, sir. In other words, it is not according to law. It is not lawful. Okay? Now, we talk a lot about lawful versus lawless here, but this is a little bit of a tweak and a little bit different angle. Why? Because you can be lawful all you want, but if it's not the law of Yahweh Elohim, you are just as guilty as the lawless. You understand where we're headed here? Lawful, if it's your own law exalted over the Torah law of Yahweh Elohim, you are as guilty as these non-believing Pharisaical leaders were being called out by Messiah, as those who are lawless. Same problem, different way of getting there. Lawful according to your own laws, superseding the laws of Yahweh, commands, ways, or lawless. Same issues. And that's actually the culmination where we're going to wrap this thing up here in several parts from now. So this is what I want to highlight for just a little bit. It would seem that these leaders were right there. We're not told this guy can even go to the temple and like have any time to himself. They're just on top of him, questioning him. How dare this whole thing unfold? It's unlawful. It is what? Not permissible. Okay, well, here we have to start asking what? A true student of the Word now must ask this question, according to what law? According to whose law? We have been told in Christianity, if we're honest, well, this is another evidence that this was breaking the Torah. Messiah told this healed man to pick up his bed and walk and break the Torah, because Jesus came and said there's a new way to walk. And even the Pharisees in this text right here in verse 11, verse 10, said, see, they're confirming what we're saying here in Christian dispensational living. That is unlawful for you to do that right there, man. It's unlawful for that Messiah man over there to tell you to do so. We are upholding the law of Elohim. That's what we've been told, but that's not what this text says. That's not what this says, and that's not what they were saying. They're saying this action of you picking up your bed and walking right now, that, my friend, is unlawful according to us. That is unlawful, unacceptable, not permissible on a Sabbath day according to our Talmudic tradition and law. And if we do not have that rightly established in our foundational understanding as believers in Messiah, we will believe, therefore, from that point and others, that Messiah came and overturned his Father's perfect law. Perfect law. So why did the non-believing Pharisees miss Messiah? To remind you of the question that we are looking at. We have to ask, according to what law was it unlawful? Okay? If we're free to be, if we want to be free from dispensational bias in Christian tradition, we have to realize that our traditions, our ways, our way of thinking what is right and wrong, even lawful, permissible, is very much like the Pharisees, because we have allowed our own understanding and bad doctrine to supersede the Word, to override what Yeshua is even doing here on the Sabbath and why. It's worth noting that this theme, in my opinion, is constant. For those who don't know, this is what Yeshua was always coming up against with the non-believing Pharisees. We see it is this phrase, these words, it is unlawful all over the Gospels when Yeshua and his disciples are encountering the non-believing Pharisees. It is unlawful is redundantly used from pulpits all across America and the world, for that matter, to drive home this point that Messiah came and said, I don't care what you say is law. I'm here to establish a new one now. And if we believe for 1 second that we think Yeshua was replacing Yahweh, his Father's law, with his own new way to live, friend, we will have a foundational doctrine, belief system that opposes the reason. It's anti-Messiah. There's no way to say it. It's anti-Messiah to say that Yeshua was saying, I know this is unlawful according to my Father, and I told him to take up his bed and walk. I say go anyway. I don't care that it's a Sabbath law. Get out of here. That is a sadly ridiculous proposal for consideration. If we believe that way anywhere in our hearts, we miss the point entirely of what Messiah was confronting. We have to understand this phrase, it is unlawful. And ask that question I posed 5 minutes ago. Unlawful to who? To what law? Okay? The leaders, said it was unlawful to eat grain on the Sabbath in Matthew 12. It was unlawful to heal on the Sabbath, Matthew 12 again. In Luke chapter 6, we read of the disciples picking off grains of corn and being corrected for what was, quote, unlawful. Sadly, most people do what I did my whole life in ignorance and Christianity doctrine ignorance, my own tradition. They say, well, I guess that was a Torah command that was in the process of being removed by Messiah, being replaced, being superseded by Messiah, because Messiah came and said, don't worry about those Sabbath commands that my Father gave. I'm here now. And friends, that is not true. That's not what this text is saying clearly to our point in John chapter 5. He was in no way showing that lawful commands of his Father, the Torah commands of his Father, were becoming in any way obsolete. Those stubborn works-only Pharisees couldn't receive Jesus and the new covenant because they were clinging to Yahweh's Torah law. No. No. Please make sure, friend, that's not in your heart or understanding. If we believe this, we're sadly mistaken, and we will not even, I say, understand fully what the gospel even is. It will be off, skewed. So while we're here, as we bring part 2 closely here to a conclusion, we've got to ask. Actually, we have to answer our own question about why did the non-believing Pharisees miss Messiah? Well, let's let the Word tell us. Wouldn't that be the best way to do it rather than our opinions? Why did they reject the Messiah, friend? Why? It's not because Yeshua was teaching to leave behind the Torah and they loved it so much, the perfect instruction of his Father. So why then? Well, if we skip ahead towards the end of today's John 5 text, we see this is all the way down in verses 37 and 38. Specifically, we read this. Yeshua speaking, he says, "The Father who sent me, he has testified about me." Who is he talking to? The non-believers now. "You've neither heard his voice at any time nor seen his form. Also, you do not have his word remaining in you, because you do not believe him whom he sent." These religious men did not believe the Messiah because the Father's word, which was what? What was his Father's word in John chapter 5? What was it? What was the word? The Torah and the prophets. The Torah and the prophets, okay? So these non-believers that Yeshua was confronting are told they didn't believe in Messiah because the Torah and the prophets were not remaining in them. Okay? They weren't in them. They weren't residing within their hearts, friend. So to be crystal clear, why did these men miss the Messiah? It was not because they clung so tightly to the old covenant, not because they so perfectly obeyed the Torah and Sabbath commands that they couldn't receive what Messiah was doing on the Sabbath day to heal this man. Verse 40 even goes on to say that they examined the scriptures for eternal life. Yes, but it wasn't within them, friend, and that can be any one of us. Any one of us could be guilty of that. No, the answer, they did not know Yahweh, nor did they have his word upon their hearts. So friend, as we begin to move further into John chapter 5 and just ask some questions and examine our understanding, our foundations, friend, it is imperative for us to make sure we know the reason that Messiah was missed by the non-believing Pharisees that had been entrusted to carry on the perfect commands of Yahweh Elohim and disperse them to the people was because they had set them aside and put a superseding law of their own intent, of their own invention, over the commands of Yahweh, Yeshua's Father. That Yeshua came back to say, you know what? The problem isn't that you're clinging to my Father's old ways. That's not the problem. That's not why they're missing me, I believe he would say. I believe Messiah would say, Christian church, the Pharisees that did not believe in me did not miss me because they were clinging to the old covenant. They missed me because they were not walking in my Father's ways already. And they were teaching people their own ways, their own commands, instead of my Father's. And that's what I was calling out over and over and over. And friends, I'm telling you, I'm itching so bad to get to part 4. Part 4 is a grand slam, base clearing, incredible, I would even say revelation of sorts that I had, and I hope you have too when we get there, of holy cow, this is what Yeshua was saying when he did what he did to break the Sabbath. As I said back at the beginning, did Yeshua break the Sabbath? And I said a little it sounds like like heretical, or like it would endorse Christianity's mainstream opinion of like, well, kinda. It's going to take some time to get there, but friend, it's incredible. I hope you stick around. We've still got part 3 also, which is going to be Sabbath law or man-made traditions, and we'll kind of pose that as a question so we're not too offensive. Is Christianity in any way like Talmudic Pharisaism? Friends, can you take these questions? I haven't done a video forever because I don't want to offend anyone anymore. But you know what I do want? I want people to be free. I want people to see that this word is a wonderful, incredible story of covenantal redemption, that Messiah came and perfectly personified a human being obedient to the utmost to his Father's commands. And then said, you know what? Go and do likewise, people. Lose your life for my sake and be a Father-pleasing son like me. Go on. And oh, by the way, here's Holy Spirit to empower you, to remind you of every single thing I ever said. Incredible, friend. Not some go and start a new church and change everything my Father ever established for his set-apart, holy, righteous people. We're starting over. There is no need to start over. It's a beautiful covenantal extension of an ingathering for whosoever will come through what? The door, the Son. The door into what? Well, that's a whole other day, whole other topic. As we talk about John chapter 5 and ask these tough questions. Come back for part 3, won't you, after this? We've got plenty more to go through. You're watching the Path to Zion podcast. We're rediscovering the ancient way. Amen.